If you watched our first episode on Congressman Cory Mills, you might have been shocked that a radical Muslim cleric with terrorist ties officiated his wedding, but we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg.
And if you remember that report, you'll remember that the congressman called us up afterwards when we merely asked him who officiated that wedding and what his religion was, and talked to one of our reporters for 50 minutes. That reporter is here tonight. And tonight, we're going to move on and put the spotlight on the congressman's war hero image that catapulted him into Congress. As it turns out, there are aspects of his military career that don't add up, and there are people accusing him of stolen valor.
And elsewhere, Donald Trump puts the pedal to the metal towards a midnight vote on his big, beautiful bill. But he's not just driving into a wall of Democrats. He's actually facing Republican opposition as well.
Oh, yeah, the Republican tradition of friendly fire. This is why we often can't have nice things. But this time around, can Trump and Thomas Massie play nice before midnight? Or are we going to go back to the drawing board?
And the Biden presidency might have more in common with the Free Britney movement than it does with any of the previous administrations.
It sounds crazy, but bear with us. We will explain. And at the very least, you can take this to the bank. You can't trust either of them with sharp objects. But I will say, Jill, at least Britney can dance.
She absolutely can. We have a jam-packed show for you tonight. Don't go anywhere. Blaze News The Mandate starts right now. Good evening, Patriots. I'm Jill Savage, joined as always by Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. And we have some special help tonight. We have a guest here to help unravel the tale of Cory Mills. Peter Gietl is here, and he's the managing editor for Frontier Magazine and Blaze Media's Return. So let's dive straight into this. So, Peter, I just have to know personally, because you and I were working on this story essentially from day one. So I need to know just how crazy you thought I was when I walked upstairs on one Friday afternoon and asked you to start helping me dig through the story of potential stolen valor that we'll be getting in here too today.
I'll be honest, I thought you were pretty crazy.
Thank you. Thank you.
When you first started explaining it, I had a lot of questions. I thought, this can't be true. Maybe you're misunderstanding this. Then we started digging into it that night. And it just has gotten crazier and crazier and crazier every time we've dug into another aspect of the story, another direction. It just keeps getting weirder and stranger.
Yeah, well, let's rehash the first round of craziness that we spoke about last time on the Spotlight. The Spotlight is a new section of our show which is feared and also desired. Sometimes we spotlight the good, and sometimes we spotlight the not so good. And in this case, we just at first spotlighted the strange, right? Because the oddest thing that this started with is realizing after these allegations of domestic abuse came out, and then the girlfriend of the congressman, Cory Mills, said nothing happened, and they both said everything's fine. People realized that he was still married. He's in the process of divorce with this girlfriend for over a year, she said. And then the marriage certificate came up, and that was the first crazy thing that Jill said when she accosted me. She mentioned this marriage certificate, and of course, as we learned last time and the article showed, he explained it to us that he was married by a radical Islamic cleric to help his wife be able to go back to Iraq. That was his story. And after we verified that, we asked around, and it turned out that at least 5 former associates of Mills, one on the record, said he did in fact convert when he became Muslim. I mean, and just to rehash this, I mean, this was a radical mosque he was married in. This mosque, we can show a picture of it in Falls Church, Virginia, is known as the Al-Qaeda Mosque because former members of Al-Qaeda were there. The guy who officiated his wedding was an unindicted co-conspirator in the World Trade Center bombing, among other things.
Back in 1993.
This is Muhammad al-Hanoudi. We can see his info here. This is who married him. So that was puzzling, and he maintained that he was not, Muslim. He's always presented as Christian, and this marriage didn't change who he was. And here's how we know this. I mean, how we confirmed it is we reached out to him. Actually, we, meaning Peter Gietl, reached out to him, and the congressman called him up, basically threatening lawsuits in a very contentious 50-minute phone call with you, where he spoke about this issue and also about stolen valor, which we'll get to in a minute. So how does this start, right? How does this start for all of us? It starts because the congressional primary in 2022 was at first going to go to someone I know, an acquaintance, a friend, Anthony Sabatini. It looked like he was going to win for the Republicans. Cory Mills sort of swooped in out of nowhere, got the MAGA endorsement, and ran for office. And at the time, I didn't pay it any attention because once, Mar-a-Lago had supported Mills and he was self-funding. He seemed like the obvious candidate, heroic story. At that time, there was an opposition website that came out that had a bunch of information about Cory Mills. I didn't pay any attention at the time, but a few years later, one Jill Savage did pay attention and began looking into it.
Yeah, I stumbled upon the website, CoryMillsWatch.com, and I went all throughout it, and there was a podcast on there from a Green Berets Chronicle podcast. And there were two men being interviewed on this podcast, Bobby Aller and William Kern. And these two men just grabbed my attention because I thought, man, there's so much in here. They have so much detail already in this podcast. I think it runs for like an hour, 40 minutes. And I watched the entire thing, and they went through and they were like, we're trying to get the truth out there. And Peter, that's when I brought you into this story too, and just said, okay, like there's so much detail already here. What else can we go through and find?
Yeah, it was important to get to the bottom of what really happened. And we have to give a lot of credit to those men who, did a lot of legwork up front and then have been brave enough and willing to go on the record and tell the story of what really happened over in Iraq when he was in the Army and then later as a contractor. And it's very important because he's run and is in Congress because of those alleged events that he's taken credit for, which, talking to all these people, is now very much in dispute. And everyone says that it's not the story that happened. And now he's on, the Foreign Services Committee making decisions about young men going into war around the country. It's not right.
Can you just, before we dive into this, can you just go into the sort of attitude in general of these people that you talked to who served with him or were, in private contracting with him in Iraq, in terms of their attitude about this story? I get the impression that many felt like the story had been suppressed for some time.
Well, it was honestly really a sore wound with them. I mean, they all seemed like very trustworthy, upstanding citizens, all former veterans that then had served as contractors. And they were just upset that, in their opinion, he had lied about what he had done. And there were, a lot of their friends who were badly injured that died over there. And then for this guy to all of a sudden run for Congress saying a bunch of things that they were there for and they claim that didn't happen, they were extremely upset. They were extremely saddened. They were hurt. And the story that they kept saying over and over again is, we just want the truth to get out there about what really happened.
Well, let's get into that. You guys have done so much incredible work on this, in the midst of doing many other things over the last few weeks. First, let's get what the story is. So Mills, Jill, is both in the Army and then afterwards works for DynCorp, a private contractor, basically like a Blackwater military service, right, in Iraq. And he does both these things. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Cory Mills served in the Army from 1999 to 2003, and then he became a private contractor from 2005 to 2009. And you'll find some of the discrepancies that Peter will go through here in a minute, but we'll start to get a little bit more technical here, right? Because if you go into the DD 214, that's your official military record that is given to you from the Army. Now, it's interesting because what is written on his DD 214 doesn't match what's on his DynCorp resume. And there is when we start to get to some of these first discrepancies. He claims to be an Army Ranger. He claims that he has gone to sniper school. And there's a lot of people that Peter, that you have talked to, that said he is absolutely not an Army Ranger, and there are some interesting stories around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and he's made these claims for years as he's been running for Congress, and then on CNN. They were saying, again, DynCorp is very similar to Blackwater. They had the similar type contract over there that he was working as a contractor. I mean, they were saying that he was representing himself as a Ranger. They doubted it, but then actually real Rangers came to work for them, and they were extremely upset to the point that some of them were threatening to commit violence against him if he didn't stop claiming to be an Army Ranger, which is a very prestigious, hard unit of the military to get into. And so for him to start claiming this really rubbed these guys the wrong way.
Yeah, I think we all know some Rangers, and that's a big no-no. What's interesting is that even some years later, we have this Vice article appears in which he's mentioned and listed, if we could show that, a Vice article where he's called a former Army Ranger and CEO of his international weapons company, which he started right after getting married to an Iraqi naturalized American citizen in the Radical Mosque. But here you have a guy who's, if he's called an Army Ranger here, but I don't know for a fact that he told them he was a Ranger, but Vice magazine is reporting that, and that's something that is simply not true as far as we know, right?
No, it's absolutely not true. There's no evidence of that. I mean, he confirmed on the very contentious call when he called me and threatened me and was very upset with me asking some basic questions that he was not in fact an Army Ranger.
What about what are some other things that he listed as qualifications? I believe he said he was a sniper. Jill said
he did. He was going through and saying that he was a sniper, and I know that we actually go through. You don't have to take our words for it. We can go ahead and listen to him on CNN after Trump, the first Trump assassination in Butler, PA. He was on CNN, and everybody on the panel kept referring to him as a sniper. Let's go ahead and take a look.
When we go up as a counter sniper, we put together what we call range fans for our range card. We usually keep it right next to us.
I also do want to ask you, you are a sniper yourself. You have been a sniper yourself. How good was this guy as a shot?
He wasn't, and that was the thing that saved the president.
I mean, you're a sharpshooter. Are we holding, you see what I'm getting at? It's
the average shooter could
have been able to do that.
So it's interesting because at never one point did he go through and say, oh, that wasn't actually what I was there doing as a qualified, either in the Army or days as a contractor. But when we were talking, Peter, with some of his guys that he worked with over in Dying Corps, they would say, well, we knew it. We didn't even need to see his paperwork because he didn't get any of the verbiage right. And I think that's such an important thing, that if you went through these classes, it didn't matter if you were in the Army, if you were a Marine, if you just came through the Navy, they would all have their different codes, their different language that they would speak. But they all claimed to us that he never knew any of the lingo that he should have known at that point, and they were basically, as they say, teaching him on the go. And he, to their credit, he said, Max Woodside said, to Cory's credit, he did pass all of the courses that he went through once he was there as a private contractor, but the problem is that he never should have been there in the first place based on his qualifications that he did have on his DD-214.
Exactly. I mean, there was a lot of stories. He didn't know the grain size of the ammo. He had to use an app to do very basic calculations that they said everyone is going to know how to do as a sniper in their head immediately. And I mean, what was conveyed to me by many of these men was that they were upset because by allegedly lying to get in there and misrepresenting his skills, he was putting them and their friends in danger.
So on the sniper point, you have to wonder. So he lied about his qualifications in order to take classes, right? From DynCorp, from the private contractor, to be a sniper. But what was his actual position in the Army and at DynCorp?
He was a medic who had never seen combat experience, according to his DD-214. There's no record of him experiencing combat. We get into that. There's discrepancies with his Bronze Star that we can talk about as well. But so he misrepresented basically what he was, and he listed all of these qualifications in order to get this very prestigious and very high-paying job at the time. I think it was around $200K a year, in order to get that and be involved in Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Well, and JSOC is one of the things that he says that he was a part of. And I know we can go back to one of his campaign videos. He can tell you here himself that he was a part of JSOC. Let's watch.
I enlisted in the United States Army, serving as a member of the Joint Special Operations Command in the 82nd Airborne Division.
So, Peter, we know that part is absolutely not true.
It's completely not true because, again, it's not on any of his official records that he left the military. And I mean, you would assume it's been almost 20 years later that he would have rectified the record on that if they just left that off of his, but he never did that. It's either you were in JSOC or you weren't. There's no record of it. There's no one who remembers him being part of JSOC. And again, that's a huge, very hard, prestigious achievement to be part of that. And then to just say that you were part of it is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, to actually have that in a campaign ad, be running on a biography that is false is an enormous problem.
But it gets worse because for me, one of the juiciest parts of this entire story is that, one of the cornerstones of his campaign is that he says he was blown up twice in Iraq. Let's go ahead and watch that part.
I was hit not once, but twice with improvised explosive devices and explosive form projectiles. After you take a hit like that, you don't know if you're going to survive or not. And it puts your life into a whole new perspective. Would you take a hit for your country? Would you risk your life for the Constitution? Would you make the sacrifice?
Well, let's go ahead and dive into that, Peter, because it is so interesting. You hear him say that he was blown up twice in Iraq, but what did he tell you?
Well, I got wind of this first by talking to the men that served with him, that worked with him, who said that story is absolutely not true. And then when I was on the phone with him for close to an hour, I kept pressing him on why does his campaign website say that he was blown up twice? Why does he keep repeating this? And the men that he served with don't remember this, and it's not on his DD-214. And he finally did admit that he was not blown up twice, and that the one time that his Suburban was hit with an IED, it was a very light IED, and he hit his head on the roof of the car, which, is a little bit different than saying that you were wounded twice in Iraq. And it's, again, the testimony of the men that are around there. Even we talked to some guys that didn't want to go on record. They all had the same exact story. These are really serious allegations of stolen valor.
Yeah, so there's two incidents. One, as far as you can determine, there's really nothing that happened. And then the other...
another SUV was hit, and two men were badly injured in that, but he was not in that vehicle where those two men were injured.
And this is all in our article. You can read, several people who were there describing, at least in the one case, charitably, we can say it's a gross exaggeration to call it sort of a war injury. And in the other, there appears to be nothing that happened. And again, he ran on this. Now, don't we have the campaign video where he mentions, in his ad that he also was injured twice in Iraq? And there's a conflation here that you guys have pointed out between his actual military record and then his time as a private contractor, when he talks about these things in public. But the ultimate proof that something was wrong is not only all these firsthand accounts of exaggerations and the absence in his military record of many of the things that he's claimed to be. It's the fact that many people say, and his supervisor at the time says, as you both have figured out, that he just left his job in the middle of the night. Tell me about this, Peter.
I spoke with Jesse Peters, who was his direct commander, supervisor in the field. And basically there was an incident with Blackwater where they accidentally killed a journalist, and some of the contractors had lied about their service who were involved with that. So the State Department wanted everyone to resubmit all of their qualifications in order to go, hey, we're paying these people a lot of money. This is really serious. We want to make sure these are the right elite level people providing security. And they gave him months to turn it in. They kept asking him, hey, Cory, you really have to turn this in, otherwise you won't be allowed to continue to work here. And then the last day, at the last possible moment, according to his supervisor, he left his Glock, he left his M4, he left his walkie-talkie, and he just left. And no one knew what happened to him. He didn't tell anyone. He just disappeared. And he apparently just walked off the job, according to them, which everyone found very strange. And then they go, oh, well, maybe he didn't have the qualifications that he claimed he did.
Jill, real quick, how did we come to this information?
Looking through all of this, I mean, I just heard this on the podcast that I mentioned earlier, and I heard William Kern say this very story. And I was just sitting there in my living room, and I'm like, you know what? I need to get these people on the phone. And thanks to Matthew Peterson for letting me continue moving forward. And thanks for Peter to actually go through and do some of the research with me, because then once we actually started talking to these people and bringing them into the fold, as you can tell, this has been something that we have been looking into. There will be more coming out. We're very excited to continue going down this rabbit hole and seeing where it all leads.
I mean, we have to, I commend again everyone who came out in this story. It's a brave thing to do when you have a powerful congressman who obviously does not want to be bothered by us or anyone else and calls us fake news for asking simple questions, to come out on the record like this. So kudos to them for doing this, but also to you, Peter, for going and getting this story. Now, for his part, what does the congressman say about him leaving in the middle of the night?
The congressman claims that he was sick of being there and wanted to go home and got some dispensation to leave early. None of it really made a ton of sense to me, but that was his claim. I mean, I'd like to say, this wasn't just Jill and myself. There was a huge team of people, from our intern Cooper Williamson to Steve Baker, Joe Hanneman. There was a lot of people here at Blaze that have worked really hard on this, and as well as the men that went on record to tell their story.
A lot of the editors, the legal team, everybody's getting involved in this story.
Because we want to get it right. And the thing that's important to me is, especially when someone threatens a lawsuit for asking who married you and what religion you are, it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes for the spidey sense to go up. And I don't like being threatened, and we're not going to be threatened by people in power. That's ridiculous. Our job is to hold them into account. It doesn't matter whether they're right or left. Doesn't matter whether they're MAGA, Maha or not. We're just in a time where we need real leaders, and we need to question the people that have been presented as leaders, because if they aren't who they're saying they are, we don't have time for them. I just want to get them aside and move on. So this story, I mean, he says that he left, but he left DynCorp. But in the article, you have him, he's quoting, he's saying, "Oh, it's ridiculous. I left in the middle of the night, et cetera." He's just disputing what his supervisor says, just denying it flat out. So someone isn't telling the truth here. And you need to read the article to figure out, who you think is who's the good guy and bad guy in this story. I know that you both keep hearing that these people from the past, these colleagues, coworkers, they want answers. They want some kind of justice to be fulfilled here. And remember, this congressman is on the Foreign Affairs and House Armed Services Committee. So that's a serious thing. So if we're going to wrap this up a little bit, I mean, the article does talk a little bit about his Brown Star. There's some questions about that, his time in the Army. It's a little bit more complicated of a story, but that certainly there's been questions about it. But I'm interested in both of you just summarizing, again, the sentiments of his former colleagues, generally about him. And because he did say some sort of positive things about him as well, which made some of this terrible behavior even more puzzling.
Yeah, absolutely. They described that, there were times where he did show bravery. The time that he claimed that he was blown up, he actually ran to the other car and apparently helped patch up some of the soldiers. And so they said what was strange to them was there were things that he could have said, "Hey, I served, I was over there, I did this and that." But what each one of those men kept saying was throughout the time that they've known him, he compulsively exaggerates what he did, his importance to it, and he can't stop. And honestly, throughout the research, we found that in dozens of different examples of him exaggerating.
Well, Jill, I guess we can just leave it at that. But what we should say is that there will be more to come. This is not the beginning of this. This is not the end of this story. This is hardly the beginning, and there will be more.
There will absolutely be more. Everybody, though, should go check out this story right now. It's up at theblaze.com. It has the links for all the articles, all the videos that we were talking about earlier. It has a ton of pictures in there, and you guys can go decide for yourself what you believe. And Peter, thanks so much for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jill.
Well, don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more right after this. By the time this show wraps up, there'll be another family farm that's shut down. And it's not going to be from a lack of hard work, but because all that meat at the grocery store is imported from overseas. The 85% of the grass-fed beef that you see sold in the United States, it's not from here. And shoppers have no idea. But this is why you should get all your meat from GoodRanchers.com, because you know it's 100% American. It's born, raised, and harvested right here. And you can support real family farms. So now more than ever, you need to make the switch to Good Ranchers because they are tariff proof. Everything is made here in America. Grocery store prices, they can be unpredictable, but Good Ranchers stays consistent. And actually, when you subscribe right now, you get your choice of free meat for life, and you can choose between Wagyu burgers, hot dogs, bacon, or wings in every single box. And you can get an extra $40 off with my code Jill. Now, tariffs, they won't touch them, but this deal isn't going to last forever. So visit goodranchers.com today. That's goodranchers.com, code Jill. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. It's crunch time for Trump's big, beautiful bill, and it's easy to drown out the boring Capitol Hill jargon. So Trump told Americans what's at stake on Fox News earlier today.
Look, the alternative is a 68% tax increase. And you can blame the Democrats for that and one or two grandstanders. We only have one or two, but we have tremendous support. But you'll have a 68% tax increase, or you'll get a massive tax decrease. You'll get a tax cut, the likes of which we've never had before. This is bigger than any Ronald Reagan tax cut. It's even bigger than the tax cut that I gave, because as you know, that's being extended and increased. So this is the biggest tax cut in the history of our country, or you'll get a 68% tax increase.
Give me the tax cuts, and give me Chris Bedford. He's our DC correspondent. He also has a talent for making legislation interesting, and he joins us now. So Bedford, I know we're definitely going to run through this a little bit more tomorrow, but we have to touch on it. When Donald Trump is out there telling all the American people today, I'm going to give you tax cuts, they're going to be big, they're going to be beautiful. Take us through a little bit of this bill and what's holding it up right now.
Sure. The bill is going to make permanent the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which if the bill is not passed, then on December 31st, they disappear. And it amounts to the largest tax hike in American history. Now, some of these sorts of taxes, of course, were hammered out in K Street lobbyists, but a lot of them actually will affect you and me. They'll affect people who are in the $200,000 bracket, $100,000 bracket, a little bit less so, but a lot of families, a lot of middle-class families will be impacted by this. A lot of small businesses will be impacted by this, and it's in the bill right now. It's supposed to be pushed through, potentially with some additions, like no tax on tips and no tax on overtime or around certain parameters. These are things that will have an immediate impact on the American economy. But this includes Donald Trump's entire legislative agenda, essentially. It backs up all the things that he's looking for. It gives him funding for deporting illegal immigrants. You're not going to see millions of people, dangerous criminal aliens, deported unless the money shows up. It's going to be smaller groups like we've been seeing these past few months. That will continue. You're not going to see the Trump administration able to do a lot of its agenda that it's hoping to accomplish if you don't see this. But there are still some arguments around the edges.
Well, Chris, you are the foremost interpreter of legislation in Congress out there today, and that is a difficult job. I want to throw something maybe a little bit easier to you next. In your latest Beltway brief, you talk instead about the Democrats, and here's something that maybe a lot of people might agree with in our audience, but is still ultimately somewhat surprising, and that is how they're not going to learn a thing from 2024.
Yeah, that's correct. They seem incapable of learning from 2024, and they've thrown up every block they possibly can. Look at the presidency of Joe Biden. In order to go to the beginning of it, you have to remember that he was not the Democrats' first choice. Neither of the powerful, like the Obamas or the Clintons or the DNC, nor of the base, who wanted basically anybody but Joe Biden. He got blown out in Iowa. He didn't do well in New Hampshire. He was not attracting crowds in these places. His fortunes changed in South Carolina, and the main reason for his fortunes changing was because he was the only person on the stage when Democrats were asked, who actually made it to Iowa, who actually made it to New Hampshire, who was willing to say, no, I will not decriminalize border crossings. I'm not going to change that. He was simply the only person up there who wasn't completely crazy. So they pushed him forward. They rallied black votes around him, particularly in South Carolina. And they took that message of he's the winner, he's the one everyone's backing. to the more conservative Democratic states that came next in the primary. And the Super Tuesday votes really cemented it and made him the nominee. Keep in mind that he was running against people that included Bernie Sanders, who'd almost beaten Hillary Clinton, but was no longer nearly as powerful as he'd once been because he'd acquiesced to so much of the woke garbage, was no longer a movement leader, had given up a lot of his moral authority. Now, through those 4 years, you have Kamala Harris, who was elevated despite having never won anything. She didn't make it to Iowa in the Democratic primary. She couldn't get the backing. She couldn't get the funding. People simply didn't like her. You make her one of the most powerful people, or at least one of the most visible jobs on the planet for 4 years. And then you claim in the end, listen, we couldn't get her across the finish line because we didn't have enough time to introduce the American people to Kamala Harris. But that's just not true. She was in public the entire time. They also refused to run a campaign the entire time. Anyways, these are all just some of the problems that Democrats do have, that they're willing in some level to acknowledge that Joe Biden now, the tapes are out and everything else, that Joe Biden was too old, too senile, and possibly too sick to be an effective president for the Democratic Party. But that doesn't get to the real issue here. Why he was chosen in the first place, why Kamala Harris was actually rejected, and why they're still lost in the wilderness is very toxic ideas. As we were talking about with Terry Schilling yesterday in the program, the Democrats have chosen a number of issues where the American people are 9-1 against them. They're not popular ideas, and they've taken them time after time after time, which is something you usually allow for Republicans. You usually expect Republicans to do that sort of thing. But nowadays, it's Democrats. And as long as they're up there saying Kamala Harris didn't lose, Donald Trump didn't win, Joe Biden lost. He's the real reason all this happened. Listen, guys, we can go home now. There's no need to actually have any introspection. A person who will have no impact on the party's future, a person who will have no be part of any of the policy discussions of what's coming forward. He was the real problem. And now that he's on his way out, we don't have to actually talk about anything other than that. We don't have to have any kind of self-reflection. This, I think, is a really dangerous decision. The party won, and we've talked about this before, I've written about this before, lacks a kind of visionary leader who's going to come forward, at least that's visible right now, and grab the party and say, we're going to go back to electoral success by changing things. The way that Donald Trump did for the GOP, the way that Bill Clinton did for the Democratic Party after 12 years, basically decades in the wilderness, aside from a brief blip with Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton kind of changed that by taking on a lot of Republican ideas, saying the age of big government is over. We're going to balance the budget. We're going to cut taxes. We're not going to be crazy in the social stuff. That's the kind of figure that you really need. They don't have that. And barring that, you'd hope that some of the consulting class and some of the people, some of the poobahs that actually do wield a lot of power in the Democratic Party, unlike the GOP, would be able to say, listen, some of this stuff is crazy. Right now, it's kind of just confided to the James Carvilles and other people out there who don't live perpetually online, who aren't completely obsessed with the latest Twitter flag in the bio outrage, and who there's very few people out there saying, listen, we need to talk about what working class people care about. We need to talk to our base. And by the way, that's one of the huge things that Trump is doing with this new agenda. When you're talking about the numbers who came out and voted, the reason why Trump outperformed almost every single Republican senator and almost every single Republican House member who got elected this past term, the reason why Trump outperformed them by so much is because he activated voters who weren't activated by normal Republicans. They came out for him. They cared what he was talking about. And I got news to you. These people, a lot of them are on some kind of public benefits. A lot of these people who aren't on different public benefits, even regardless, are still in a lot of the working class jobs. They are personally affected by no tax on overtime. They are personally affected by no tax on tips. That's why these are some of the things that Trump's promised on the campaign trail and some of the things that he needs to deliver on. Compare that to the old GOP way or compare that to the Democratic Party's way.